What's up guys, Houndish here, and today I wanted to talk a little bit about episode content, the future of episode and season style content in Destiny, some concerns that I see from players in the community, and a little bit of general feedback about the content that we've had over the past few months. And I think we're pretty well into the episode model now, right? We've had a full episode with Echoes and we're halfway through Revenant. We kind of have an idea how Revenant is going to play out at this point. And to summarize it in a pretty quick way, really, the key difference between episodes and seasons is that episodes have more activities, or at least they get a different mode which drops with Act 2. We've had that with both episodes so far. On top of that, artifact mods are added, season pass ranks are added, and a couple of weapons are added after the initial launch of the episode. And there are more of each of these elements now with episodes than seasons, which in itself is good. And between acts, I'd say there are a fair amount of sandbox updates, events like Iron Banner, the Dawning, and so on. So it makes the calendar overall feel maybe a bit busier than it would sometimes have felt during the seasonal model, especially in those quieter spells that we'd have at the end of a season. And I'd also like to slide in at this point and say, I think personally, for the amount that episodes actually cost, right, we are getting a fair amount of content. Now, there's a difference between the amount of content and how much players are enjoying the content or enjoying engaging with the game in the same way that we perhaps were 2 or 4 years ago. But as an actual amount of stuff that's dropping, on paper, it represents reasonably good value for money. That's just my opinion. You'll have to give us your thoughts below. But back to episodes, Act 3 over the last couple of episodes has been the lightest content drop overall. I'm sort of making an assumption with regards to Revenant right here, based on what we saw with Echoes, as it's mainly a new exotic mission, and we have had those with seasons as well, right? They drop at random feeling times in the season. It could be in the first few weeks, or often, as we saw, especially a couple of years back, we get an exotic mission a bit later on in the season. And so in a way, Act 3 is almost just a flashpoint to advertise that that piece of content is coming, whereas versus in seasons, it would just drop at some point. That is, of course, in addition to the extra mods, ranks, and things that we get with Act 3. And so episodes do two things. They roadmap the content that we're going to get quite a bit more than what we've had with seasons in the past couple of years. Going back beyond that, you'll remember the roadmaps that Bungie used to publish for seasons. And in some respects, it was more similar to the episodes we have now than perhaps the seasons that we had a year ago. Story-wise, again, it's pretty similar to seasons, but things perhaps feel more disjointed now because all of the story components are dropping at once every 6 weeks. So Bungie have removed a lot of the fluff, and I'm referring to random steps in between, like making kills and going to places and picking things up and talking to vendors 3 different times in 3 different ways. Bungie have definitely got rid of a little bit of that, although I think you can kind of tell that it's been cut out, right? This season, arguably, the fieldwork at Ido is kind of taking the place of the other random objectives that are missing from the story. Although I think that fieldwork has been an opportunity to tell sort of small standalone parts of the story or additional lore. So in a way it works, but one of my biggest issues with episode Revenant, and this has been mirrored in the community, I would say it's the return of Prison of Elders. It isn't really a return, and as Bungie said themselves, the activity is heavily inspired by Prison and is ultimately more varied than Prison of Elders was. So in some respects, there's actually more to it than what we had with the original mode. Equally though, I would say in a sense, Tomb of Elders is almost a gimmick in that when Bungie advertise it, it draws on nostalgia to get players hyped up, right? But ultimately, it's only part of the original experience. In a way, there isn't anything wrong with that. Although I would like to talk about how that may be in effect during Heresy, the next episode dropping in February. For now though, I would agree that Tomb of Elders not having more of its own unique loot is one of the biggest downfalls for the episode. We got a couple of extra Scorn-themed weapons from the season for Tomb, which is fine, but I think the thing that players miss is the sense that this holds something special, unique, or even nostalgic, right? For instance, these are kind of random examples, but if Tomb had returned with 2 or 3 of the original Prison of Elders weapons, and maybe a puzzle or even just a drop chance for an exotic, say it's Dreg's Promise, again, random example, referring to the original Prison of Elders, but something like this would have given the mode a better sense of purpose and even kind of more of an identity, a unique marker that makes it worth playing. And like I said, the specific reward suggestions aside, I think Tomb of Elders needed better connectivity between the mode itself and the identity of the rewards, creating that kind of appeal to get players back in and a sense of excitement that something new is happening, right? Just a few weeks after the initial launch of Revenant, because while player numbers are certainly not what they were a couple of years ago, when Revenant dropped, the first 6 weeks, players seemed relatively happy with the episode content. And of course, at that point, just before Tomb of Elders dropped, players were starting to get a little bit more fatigued. We kind of picked up most of the stuff. A lot of us have the rewards that we want, are rocking new builds that we want. And so at that point, I think the hope is that there's going to be something really new to draw players back in. And again, purely from a value point of view, I think episodes give us a fair amount of content, but looking at something like Tomb of Elders, I feel like it's such a significant amount of work for Bungie to actually develop that game mode. And in a strange sort of way, they went 70% of the way that they needed to go, created something cool, and something that players can at least enjoy playing for 4 or 5 weeks before the next act drops. But then they kind of stumbled with it not having the rewards to back up the work that they'd put into the actual activity design, right? And so given that a lot of players who are well invested in the game had kind of earned the rewards that they wanted, it removes a lot of the appeal for Tomb of Elders. So I would say in future, Bungie need to focus on making it as appealing as possible. And I think there should be attention paid to that for any future similar concepts to this, including in episode Heresy. Because as far as we understand it, we should be seeing something pretty similar. But in the way that I described Tomb of Elders as sort of a gimmick, that becomes one of my main concerns for episode Heresy, especially given that Bungie had said the Dreadnaught is returning. Now, Bungie haven't specified in what capacity Dreadnaught is returning. And for me, a best case scenario for the Dreadnaught coming back in Heresy would actually be potentially something similar to Season of the Haunted, where we had the return of Leviathan, right? Now, that won't necessarily be remembered as one of players' favorite seasons, but Bungie brought back a part of the Leviathan with 3 different sort of key zones and some of the in-between stuff and the pathways to each of the different areas. And while they could probably have done it better, it was kind of cool in concept to actually have a small but still somewhat explorable destination as part of a season or an episode. And I see that as the best case scenario for a return of the Dreadnaught. And I also think it's the scenario that a lot of players are going to probably be expecting to see, right? And I think in a way it would sort of be a shame for Bungie to simply put a game mode on the Dreadnaught in a certain space and that be the extent to which the Dreadnaught is actually returning. And at this point in development, I'm sure that Heresy is essentially finished. There won't be any major changes being made to the actual content now. So us saying this, I'm sure, will make absolutely no difference to how Heresy will drop. But given the nostalgia that there is for the Dreadnaught, you know, if you imagine the nostalgia around something like Prison of Elders, you can take that nostalgia and level it up 20 times when you're talking about something like the Dreadnaught. So I really hope that Bungie do something interesting with the actual space. And yes, I would agree that asking for a fully explorable Dreadnaught packed with secrets is just way beyond what we can expect to get from an episode. At the same time, I hope that Bungie have been able to take some of the really early feedback from episodes like Echoes and make some adjustments where necessary to the content that we'll see in Heresy. Otherwise, I'd absolutely love it if there was an explorable component of the Dreadnaught for Heresy. And my other big thing as well, for an Act 2 activity drop, whatever it may be, I really hope that Bungie have had the time to kind of respond to how those activities have been received in the first 2 episodes and apply some meaningful changes to how it may play out for episode 3. And here's just a complete random idea of mine, but say if Bungie have a new activity on the Dreadnaught for episode 3, it would be really cool if Act 2 brought back Court of Oryx, for example, and they can flesh it out with new mechanics, encounters, bosses, enemies, whatever it may be. But also, I think it just needs to have its own unique pool, even if it's a small selection, right, of 2 or 3 things which are completely unique to that activity, unique against the rest of the stuff that we get in the episode. While it represents better value for money for us as players, I think in a way it almost represents better value for money for Bungie as well, right? Going back to the Tomb of Elders being kind of 70% of the way there, the activity in itself is cool, but it feels disjointed by the fact that the identity and relationship between the activity and its rewards doesn't seem as fleshed out as it could be. So that's one thing I'm really looking out for Heresy itself. And like I say, hopefully the Dreadnaught coming back won't be, in a sense, a gimmick. And I think gimmick is almost like a harsh word, but I'm sure you guys get where I'm coming from. This is a destination and a piece of content that has massive nostalgia for Destiny players, so especially in the final episode of the year, I really hope that Bungie can do it justice, because it will also be the last episode that we remember of the game. Beyond this, the content model is going to change fairly significantly. So those are my thoughts anyway. I guess I'm just spilling some general feels about the game at the moment and this specific content model, so definitely let us know your thoughts down below. How do you feel about Revenant so far? What are your expectations for Heresy, and do you think that Bungie are going to be able to deliver on those? I'd love to get your thoughts below, and 2025 is going to be a very interesting year for Destiny. Another content format shift, Bungie promising some pretty big changes to certain systems in the game. And again, everything has to be well connected, right? If you're going to have new systems in the game, we need new content that makes those systems exciting and worthwhile. It's a whole complex thing, I'm sure. Give us your thoughts in the comment section. And for now, cheers for listening in to the rant. If you want to see more Destiny content, get subscribed. We'll still be covering everything over the next few months and seeing how things play out. Otherwise though, cheers for tuning in, and I hope you guys have an awesome day.